Charleston, South Carolina. A late spring afternoon painted the Magnolia estate in golden light, where Spanish moss swayed from ancient oaks, and the scent of magnolia blossoms hung thick in the humid air. 300 guests sat in pristine white chairs, their phones ready to capture what promised to be the wedding of the season. Caleb Montgomery stood at the altar in his navy suit, hands clasped, heart racing with anticipation. The string quartet began Pachelbel's canon. Every head turned toward the aisle. But before the bride could take her first step, a sound shattered the perfection. A German shepherd's bark, sharp and aggressive, cut through the music like a knife. Lupo, Caleb's 7-year-old companion, strained against his leash with a ferocity no one had ever witnessed. His eyes locked on the bride, Lucia Navarro, standing frozen in her ivory lace gown at the head of the aisle. The dog's snarl wasn't confusion, it was warning, pure, primal warning. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The quartet faltered. Someone laughed nervously, but when Lupo lunged forward with such force that Caleb's younger brother Evan nearly lost his grip, the laughter died. "Whose dog is that?" Lucia's voice was sugar-sweet, but her hands trembled almost imperceptibly against her bouquet. Caleb stared at his best friend, the animal who had been with him through his father's death, through panic attacks at 3 a.m., through every major moment of his adult life. Lupo had never shown aggression. Not once. Not to strangers, not to family, never. "He doesn't do this," Caleb murmured, more to himself than anyone else. But the ceremony had to continue. Evan dragged the still snarling Lupo toward the manor house, while the officiant cleared his throat. The music resumed. Lucia glided down the aisle with practiced grace, her smile never wavering. Yet Caleb's mother, Judith Montgomery, a retired prosecutor with decades of courtroom instincts, leaned toward her husband and whispered words that would haunt the celebration. That wasn't right. Did you see her face? No shock, no fear, just calculation. The vows were exchanged. The rings slipped on. The kiss sealed what appeared to be a perfect union. But inside the manor house, Lupo scratched desperately at a locked door, his claws leaving marks in the wood, his low growl carrying a message no human could yet understand. Something was terribly, dangerously wrong with the woman who had just become Mrs. Montgomery. The reception unfolded. Beneath strings of Edison lights, champagne flowing freely as guests praised the elegant affair, Caleb made his rounds, accepting congratulations, shaking hands with college friends and business partners. But Lucia disappeared. "Just need to touch up my makeup," she told a bridesmaid with that perfect smile before slipping away from the celebration. She didn't go to the powder room. She climbed the grand staircase to the second floor of the manor house, her heels clicking deliberately on the hardwood. And that's when Lupo went wild. The German shepherd, still confined in the upstairs guest room, threw himself against the door with such violence that the hinges rattled. His barks echoed down the hallway, frantic and furious, as Lucia passed by without even glancing at the door. Downstairs, a staff member approached Caleb. "Mr. Montgomery, should we release the dog now? He seems quite distressed." Caleb looked up from his bourbon, concern creasing his forehead. "Yeah, let him out." The moment the door opened, Lupo didn't run to his owner. He bolted down the hallway, claws scrambling for purchase on the polished floors, heading straight for the stairs, straight for Lucia. Meanwhile, Judith Montgomery's prosecutorial instincts wouldn't quiet. She excused herself from a conversation about the honeymoon destination and walked purposefully into the manor house, climbing the same stairs Lucia had ascended minutes before. The upstairs hallway was empty, but something caught Judith's eye. A framed photograph lay on the floor beneath where it had hung for decades. It hadn't simply fallen. The backing had been pried open. Judith knelt and examined it carefully, her hands steady despite her racing pulse. Behind the photograph's backing, folded and hidden, was a piece of paper. She unfolded it slowly. Bank account numbers, names she didn't recognize, routing codes, and then, handwritten in the margin, a note that made her blood run cold. "Finalize account transfer. Post-ceremony, no delays." One name stood out among the scrawled notations: Isabella Gomez, not Lucia Navarro. Judith's mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. She looked down the hallway toward the bridal suite, then back at the paper in her trembling hands. Lupo appeared at the top of the stairs, panting, eyes fixed on the closed door at the end of the hall. He positioned himself between Judith and that door, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Judith recognized that sound. Years ago, her partner's K9 unit had made that exact sound before uncovering a murder weapon. It was the sound of a dog sensing danger hidden behind a beautiful facade. Downstairs, music played. Lucia returned to the reception, composed and radiant, accepting compliments on her dress, her smile, her grace under pressure when that poor, confused dog had disrupted the ceremony. Caleb wrapped his arm around her waist, pulled her close, kissed her temple. She leaned into him perfectly, the image of a blissful bride. But upstairs, Judith Montgomery stood frozen in the hallway, holding evidence that the woman her son had just married wasn't who she claimed to be. And Lupo, the dog who knew before any human suspected, sat guard at the top of the stairs, watching, waiting, knowing that the real ceremony, the unveiling of truth, was only just beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel K9 Loyal Souls, where we uncover true stories of animals, bravery you won't believe until you see it, and tell us in the comments, what city are you watching us from? There are moments in life when instinct screams louder than reason, when something primal inside us recognizes danger before our conscious mind can process it. For dogs, particularly those trained in protection and detection, this instinct operates on a level humans can barely comprehend. They read micro-expressions, detect chemical changes in human sweat, sense intentions through body language, invisible to our eyes. A German shepherd named Lupo possessed this gift in extraordinary measure, honed through years of loyalty to one man, sharpened by an intelligence that had saved Caleb Montgomery from depression, grief, and loneliness after his father's death. This is the story of how that dog, on what should have been the happiest day of his owner's life, recognized a threat so sophisticated, so carefully constructed, that it had fooled everyone else completely. Charleston, South Carolina exists in a particular kind of time, where antebellum mansions stand alongside modern wealth, where old money mingles with new fortune, and where social events carry the weight of tradition and expectation. The Magnolia Estate, where Caleb Montgomery chose to marry Lucia Navarro, represented everything the Charleston elite valued: history, beauty, discretion, and impeccable taste. The venue had hosted governors and senators, celebrated families whose names appeared on buildings downtown, witnessed unions that merged not just hearts but financial empires. Caleb, at 32, had built his own success in commercial real estate development, expanding the Montgomery family holdings his late father had established. He was exactly the kind of man who belonged at the Magnolia Estate, tall and confident with his father's business acumen and his mother's sharp intellect. When he met Lucia Navarro at a charity gala in Savannah 18 months earlier, he believed he had found the missing piece of his carefully constructed life. She was stunning, yes, but more than that, she was cultured, mysterious, and refreshingly independent. She spoke 3 languages, claimed a childhood in Caracas before her family relocated to Miami, and worked as a consultant for international luxury brands. She never asked about his money, never pushed for commitment, never displayed the calculated interest he had learned to recognize in other women. She was, in every observable way, perfect. Their courtship unfolded like a romance novel: weekend trips to Asheville, long dinners discussing art and philosophy, quiet mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles. Lucia seemed to anticipate his needs before he voiced them, understood his grief over his father without requiring explanation, gave him space when he needed it, and companionship when loneliness crept in. She even charmed his mother, no small feat for any woman hoping to join the Montgomery family. Judith had subjected previous girlfriends to subtle interrogations disguised as casual conversation, but Lucia navigated every question with grace and authenticity. Only Lupo had reservations. The German shepherd, typically friendly and welcoming to Caleb's guests, maintained a careful distance from Lucia. He never growled, never showed aggression, but he watched her with an intensity that made Caleb uncomfortable. When Lucia stayed over, Lupo would position himself between her and Caleb's bedroom door. When she cooked breakfast, he observed from the doorway rather than begging for scraps as he did with everyone else. He's just protective, Caleb told himself, dismissing the dog's behavior as territorial instinct. He'll warm up to her eventually. But Lupo never did. As the wedding date approached, the dog's vigilance intensified. He followed Lucia room to room when she visited, sat rigid during their dinner conversations, refused treats from her hand. Caleb mentioned it to the veterinarian during a routine checkup. Some dogs just take longer to accept new people in their owner's life, the vet assured him. especially dogs as bonded to their humans as Lupo is to you. Give it time. Time ran out on that sun-soaked afternoon in Charleston, when 300 guests gathered to witness what they believed would be a fairy tale wedding. None of them knew they were actually attending the beginning of an unraveling, the first scene in a story that would expose decades of deception, reveal an underground network of identity theft and financial fraud, and ultimately prove that sometimes the most loyal heart belongs not to the person standing at the altar, but to the four-legged guardian watching from the sidelines. The morning of the wedding began with deceptive tranquility. Caleb woke in his childhood bedroom at his mother's house, a tradition Judith had insisted upon. Bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony, she had said, though Caleb suspected she simply wanted one last morning with her son before he officially belonged to someone else. Lupo lay at the foot of the bed, his breathing steady and calm. When Caleb's alarm chimed at 7, the dog stretched and yawned, seeming perfectly content. They went for their usual run through the historic district, past rainbow row houses and early morning joggers, down to the waterfront where shrimp boats were already heading out for the day's catch. The air tasted of salt and possibility. Everything felt right. Back at the house, Caleb showered while Lupo waited. Patiently on the bathroom rug, a routine they had maintained for 7 years. Evan arrived around 9 with coffee and breakfast sandwiches, teasing his older brother about finally settling down. "Never thought I'd see the day," Evan laughed, scratching Lupo behind the ears. "The great Caleb Montgomery, confirmed bachelor, actually going through with it." Caleb smiled, but something in his chest tightened, a flutter of anxiety he attributed to normal pre-wedding jitters. Lupo sensed it, immediately pressing his nose against Caleb's hand in reassurance. "We're good, boy," Caleb murmured. "Everything's perfect." At the Magnolia estate, preparations unfolded with military precision. The event coordinator, a formidable woman named Patricia, who had managed Charleston society weddings for 30 years, directed staff with sharp efficiency. Chairs aligned in perfect rows, floral arrangements of lavender, and baby's breath positioned at exact intervals. The string quartet set up, beneath the largest oak tree, testing acoustics. In the bridal suite, Lucia Navarro sat before a mirror, while a makeup artist worked on her face and a hairstylist pinned elegant curls. Bridesmaids fluttered around her, champagne glasses in hand, phones capturing every moment. Lucia smiled at all the right times, laughed at appropriate jokes, played the role of excited bride with practiced perfection. But her eyes, when no one was looking directly at her, held a different expression entirely. Calculation, assessment, the cold focus of someone executing a plan. She checked her phone periodically, sending brief texts to someone saved in her contacts only as M. The messages were simple, on schedule, no complications, will confirm transfer after ceremony. One bridesmaid noticed and giggled. "Can't even put the phone down on your wedding day. Who are you texting?" Lucia's smile never faltered. "Just confirming honeymoon details. You know how obsessive I am about planning." The bridesmaid accepted this without question, returning to her mimosa and selfies. Meanwhile, Caleb arrived at the venue at 11, 3 hours before the ceremony. Patricia intercepted him immediately. "Groom is not supposed to be here this early," she scolded, but her eyes were kind. "Getting cold feet?" "No," Caleb assured her. "Just wanted to make sure Lupo was settled. He's been a little anxious lately." The German shepherd walked beside Caleb as they toured the grounds, inspecting the setup. Lupo seemed fine until they approached the manor house. Then his demeanor shifted. His ears went forward, his tail stiffened, and he pulled toward the building with unusual insistence. "What is it, boy?" Caleb followed the dog's lead. Lupo went straight to the back entrance of the manor house, nose working overtime, a low whine building in his throat. A catering staff member emerged carrying a tray of champagne flutes. "Can I help you, sir?" "Sorry, my dog seems interested in something." Has anyone been through here?" "Just the bride and her party. They're upstairs getting ready." At the word bride, Lupo's whine intensified. He pawed at the door, looked back at Caleb, then at the door again. The message was clear. Something wrong, something dangerous, something inside. But Caleb, like most humans, filtered his dog's warning through the lens of rational explanation. "He probably smells the food," Caleb said apologetically. "We'll get out of your way." He gently pulled Lupo away. From the door, missing entirely the desperate frustration in the dog's eyes, they walked back toward the gardens where Evan was waiting with Caleb's suit. "You ready for this?" Evan asked, helping his brother with cufflinks, that had belonged to their father. Caleb looked at the altar, the chairs filling with early arriving guests, the photographer testing angles. "Yeah," he said, "I really am." But Lupo, sitting rigidly at Caleb's feet, knew better. The dog's instincts, honed by thousands of generations of evolution and sharpened by 7 years of intimate connection to this particular human, screamed that danger lurked behind the beautiful facade everyone else admired. As guests began arriving in earnest, air-kissing and admiring the venue, Judith Montgomery appeared in an elegant navy dress, her silver hair perfectly styled. She hugged Caleb tightly. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered. Then she noticed Lupo's posture. "What's wrong with the dog?" "I don't know. He's been acting strange all morning." Judith knelt and looked into Lupo's eyes. What she saw there made her pause. She had worked with canine units during her years as a prosecutor, had learned to read the signals trained dogs gave when they detected drugs, weapons, or human remains. Lupo wasn't trained for detection work, but the intensity in his gaze carried the same quality: alert, certain, unwavering. "Maybe we should keep him away from the ceremony," Judith suggested carefully, "just in case." But Caleb shook his head. "He's part of this, part of us. He stays." A decision that would change everything. 2:30 arrived with clockwork precision. The 300 guests settled into their seats, programs fanned against the late afternoon heat, despite the shade from the sprawling oaks. The string quartet transitioned from background melodies to the processional music. Caleb took his position at the altar, Evan beside him holding the rings. And Lupo, against Evan's better judgment, sat at attention near the first row, his leash wrapped securely around Evan's wrist. The bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle, each one perfectly timed, smiling broadly. The flower girl scattered petals with concentrated seriousness. Then, Pachelbel's canon began, the universal signal that the bride was ready to make her entrance. Every head turned. Phones rose to capture the moment, and Lucia Navarro appeared at the head of the aisle, a vision in ivory lace and silk, her veil catching the dappled sunlight filtering through the oak leaves. She took one step forward. Lupo's response was instantaneous and terrifying. The bark that erupted from the German shepherd wasn't the playful sound of an excited dog or even the territorial warning of a protective animal. It was pure visceral aggression, the sound a wolf makes when defending its pack from a predator. The force of it made several guests jump in their seats. Children started crying. The quartet's violinist missed a note. Lucia froze, her bouquet trembling almost imperceptibly in her hands. For just a fraction of a second her mask slipped. Her eyes flashed not with confusion or fear, but with cold recognition, as if she had been expecting this, planning for this possibility. Then the mask returned, and she was once again the startled, innocent bride confronted by an inexplicable situation. Lupo lunged against the leash with such force that Evan, despite being 6'2" and athletic, stumbled forward. The dog's snarl intensified, his focus laser-locked on Lucia, every muscle in his body straining toward her. Foam appeared at the corners of his mouth from the intensity of his effort. His eyes never wavered from the woman in white. "Lupo, down! Sit!" Evan commanded, using the firmest voice he could muster. The dog ignored him completely, something that had never happened before. Lupo was well-trained, obedient, responsive, but in this moment, every ounce of his training dissolved beneath the overwhelming imperative to protect Caleb from the threat standing at the head of the aisle. Guests began murmuring, some standing to get a better view, others pulling their children closer. The photographer, professional instincts overriding the chaos, continued shooting, capturing the surreal scene unfolding. Patricia, the event coordinator, moved toward Evan with practiced efficiency, ready to help remove the disruptive animal. But Caleb stood paralyzed at the altar. He watched his best friend, the companion who had never shown aggression toward anyone, transformed into something primal and fierce, and that dog's entire focus was directed at the woman Caleb was about to marry. "Whose dog is that?" Lucia's voice carried across the suddenly quiet garden, sweet and concerned, with just the right amount of nervous laughter underneath. But Caleb heard something else beneath the sugar-coating, a hardness, a calculation. "He's mine," Caleb heard himself say, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "I don't understand. He's never done anything like this." Judith Montgomery had moved from her seat, her prosecutor's instincts fully engaged. She watched Lucia's face carefully, cataloguing micro-expressions most people would miss. When Lupo lunged again, Judith observed that Lucia didn't flinch, didn't step backward, didn't show the natural startle response any normal person would display. Instead, Lucia's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, and her grip on the bouquet tightened until her knuckles whitened. Someone from the third row called out, "Maybe he doesn't like the dress. My dog hates when I wear white." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, people desperate for any explanation that would normalize the bizarre situation. But Evan, struggling to maintain his hold on 90 pounds of determined German shepherd, knew better. He had been around Lupo since Caleb first brought the puppy home. He had watched this dog comfort Caleb through grief, sense panic attacks before they fully manifested, navigate his owner through the darkest periods of loss. This wasn't confusion. This was recognition. The dog knew something they didn't. "We need to move him," Patricia insisted, now at Evan's side with 2 security staff members. The ceremony must continue. Caleb wanted to stop everything, to demand an explanation from his dog, from the universe, from whatever force had just shattered the perfect facade of his wedding day. But 300 guests watched expectantly. A minister stood ready. A bride waited at the aisle. Social pressure, family expectations, and the sheer momentum of the event pushed him forward. "Take him inside," Caleb said quietly, the words tasting like betrayal in his mouth. "Please, just get him calm." Evan looked at his brother, understanding passing between them. Then he nodded and began pulling Lupo toward the manor house. The dog fought every step, his claws digging into the grass, his bark deteriorating into something that sounded almost like words, like desperate attempts to communicate what he alone could perceive. As Evan dragged Lupo past Lucia, the dog made one final lunge, snapping at the air near her dress. She stepped back then, finally, a tiny movement that most missed, but Judith saw it, and in that movement she recognized something from her years in courtrooms, the reflexive response of someone whose cover has almost been blown. The dog disappeared into the manor house, his barks echoing from inside, gradually, muffled as doors closed between him and the ceremony. The quartet, with admirable professionalism, picked up the canon again from the beginning. Patricia smoothed her dress and nodded to the officiant. The show would go on. Lucia took a deep breath, reset her smile, and began her walk down the aisle as if the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. She moved with practiced grace, nodding to guests, her veil flowing perfectly behind her. When she reached the altar and took Caleb's hand, her grip was steady, confident. But Caleb's hand trembled, and somewhere inside the manor house, Lupo scratched desperately at a locked door, trying to get back to his human, trying to prevent the mistake he knew was happening, trying with every fiber of his being to stop the wedding that should never take place. The officiant's voice carried across the garden with rehearsed warmth, speaking of love and commitment, of 2 souls joining as one. But the words seemed to float on the surface of something deeper, something disturbed by what had just transpired. Caleb held Lucia's hands as instructed, looking into eyes he thought he knew, searching for some explanation, some acknowledgement of the chaos that had just erupted. She smiled at him with perfect tenderness, squeezed his hands reassuringly, played her part flawlessly. The guests had settled back into their seats, though an undercurrent of tension remained. Phones that had been raised to capture romantic moments now held footage of a German shepherd's inexplicable aggression. Some guests replayed the videos quietly, zooming in on the dog's face, on the bride's reaction, trying to make sense of what their eyes had witnessed. Inside the manor house, Lupo had been secured in an upstairs guest room. Through the closed window, his barks could still be heard faintly, a distant rhythm of warning that punctuated the ceremony like a heartbeat. The catering staff exchanged concerned glances, wondering if they should intervene, but Patricia had given strict instructions. The dog stays locked up until the reception begins. The vows proceeded. Caleb spoke his lines, promises of forever and faithfulness, words he meant with every fiber of his being. When Lucia recited hers, her voice never wavered, each syllable delivered with conviction that would have convinced anyone. "I, Lucia Navarro, take you, Caleb Montgomery, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." The minister smiled, clearly relieved to have reached this point without further disruption. "By the power vested in me by the state of South Carolina, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Caleb leaned in, and Lucia met him halfway. The kiss was perfect, camera ready, the kind of image that would look beautiful in wedding albums and framed on mantels. Applause erupted from the guests, louder than it might have been, as if everyone was collectively trying to drown out the memory of those terrible minutes before. As they walked back down the aisle together, now officially married, Judith Montgomery remained seated a moment longer than the other guests. She watched her new daughter-in-law smile and wave, watched how Lucia's free hand subtly checked her small clutch purse as if confirming something important was still there. Judith's instincts, honed by years of prosecuting criminals who smiled in courtrooms while guilty of heinous crimes, screamed that something fundamental was wrong. She rose and followed the crowd toward the reception area, but her mind was already working, already questioning. Why hadn't Lucia shown fear when the dog lunged? Why had her reaction seemed more annoyed than startled? And why, when most brides would have been shaken or upset, did Lucia seem almost relieved once the dog was removed? The cocktail hour began with champagne flowing and hors d'oeuvres circulating. Caleb and Lucia stood, receiving congratulations, posing for photos, accepting toasts from friends and family. Lucia performed brilliantly, laughing at jokes, thanking guests for their attendance, never once acknowledging the elephant in the room until someone finally mentioned it. "That was quite a moment with your dog," an elderly aunt commented, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "What do you think got into him?" Lucia's laugh was musical and self-deprecating. "I honestly have no idea. Perhaps my perfume? Or maybe he sensed my nervousness and reacted to it. Dogs can be so sensitive to emotions." The explanation sounded reasonable, and the aunt nodded, satisfied. But Caleb noticed something. When Lucia thought no one was looking, when she turned to reach for a champagne flute, her expression went completely neutral. Not happy, not concerned, just blank. A mask removed for the briefest moment before being replaced. And then Lucia excused herself, citing the need to touch up her makeup after emotional tears. During the ceremony, she kissed Caleb's cheek and disappeared into the manor house, her ivory dress trailing behind her like a ghost. What happened in the next 10 minutes would change everything, though Caleb wouldn't know it until much later. Upstairs, Lucia didn't go to the powder room. She went to the guest room where Lupo was confined, and she stood outside that door for a long moment, listening to the dog's agitated pacing. Then she smiled, a smile no wedding guest ever saw, cold and calculating. She pulled a small notebook from her clutch and made a quick notation, then continued down the hallway to a room at the far end, the room where she had stored a particular suitcase that morning. Judith Montgomery had prosecuted criminals for 23 years before retiring. She had learned to trust the feeling in her gut when something didn't align, when words and actions told different stories. That feeling now burned in her chest like acid. She excused herself from a conversation with distant cousins and walked purposefully toward the manor house. The building's interior was cooler, quieter, removed from the celebration outside. Staff moved efficiently through the halls, but the upper floor was empty. Judith climbed the grand staircase, her heels clicking on marble, following instinct more than logic. The hallway stretched before her, doors closed, afternoon light streaming through tall windows. Then she saw it. A photograph lay on the floor, its frame intact but the backing loose. Judith recognized it immediately, a family portrait that had hung in this hallway for decades, part of the estate's permanent collection. She knelt and picked it up carefully. The backing had been pried open recently. She could see fresh marks on the wood. Behind the photograph's cardboard backing, folded tight, was a piece of paper. Judith's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, precise, unmistakably deliberate. A list of names, none of which she recognized. Bank account numbers with routing codes, and then circled in red ink, Isabella Gomez, finalize account transfer post-ceremony, no delays, Montgomery Holdings, 2.3 meters initial. Judith's breath caught. She read it again, her prosecutor's mind immediately cataloging implications. This wasn't a random note, this was a plan, a financial blueprint, and the name wasn't Lucia Navarro. From down the hall came the sound of a door opening. Judith quickly refolded the paper and slipped it into her clutch. She hung the photograph back on the wall, slightly crooked, her heart racing. Footsteps approached. Lucia appeared around the corner, stopping when she saw her new mother-in-law. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Lucia's face. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. Then the bride's warm smile returned. "Judith, I was just freshening up. Shouldn't you be enjoying the party?" "I needed a moment of quiet," Judith replied, studying her daughter-in-law's Face. Big crowds exhaust me. Of course. Lucia's eyes flicked to the photograph on the wall, noting its crooked angle, then back to Judith. Shall we head back down together? They walked side by side down the hallway, two women who both knew more than they were saying. At the top of the stairs, Lupo's muffled barking could still be heard from the locked room. Lucia paused, tilting her head as if considering something. "Poor thing must be so confused," she said softly. "I hope he'll eventually accept me." Judith didn't respond immediately. She thought about the note in her clutch, about the name Isabella Gomez, about her son who had just legally bound himself to this woman. "Dogs have excellent instincts," Judith finally said, her voice level. "They sense things we often miss." Lucia's smile never wavered, but her eyes went cold for just a moment. "Yes, I've heard that, though sometimes they're just reacting to unfamiliar scents or sounds. Not everything is as meaningful as we want it to be." They descended the stairs together, returning to the reception where Caleb waited, unaware that his mother now carried evidence suggesting his bride was someone else entirely. As music played and guests danced under string lights, Judith excused herself to the parking lot. She sat in her car and photographed the note from every angle, then sent the images to a former colleague at the prosecutor's office with a simple message: "Need this checked. Urgent. Confidential." The response came within minutes. "We'll run it tonight. What's going on?" Judith typed back, "I'm not sure yet, but I think my son just married a ghost." That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. Lucia lay beside him in their hotel suite, breathing steadily, her hand resting on his chest. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lupo's face, the desperate fury in the dog's eyes, the way he had lunged toward Lucia as if she were a threat that needed to be eliminated. At 2 in the morning, Caleb slipped out of bed and stood by the window, watching Charleston's lights shimmer in the distance. His phone buzzed, a text from Evan. "Lupo won't settle. Still pacing. You okay?" Caleb typed back, "Can't sleep either. Something feels wrong." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "Mom wants to talk to you. Tomorrow. Says it's important." Caleb stared at the message. His mother's instincts were legendary in their family. When she said something was important, it was. He glanced back at Lucia, sleeping peacefully, looking innocent and beautiful in the moonlight. How could this woman, who had been nothing but loving and supportive, be anything other than what she appeared? But then he remembered her face during the ceremony, that microsecond when Lupo lunged and her expression went completely flat, emotionless, before the concerned bride mask slipped back into place. He remembered how quickly she had recovered, how perfectly she had played the role for the rest of the evening. Morning came with pale light filtering through hotel curtains. Lucia woke cheerful, stretching like a cat, smiling at her new husband. "Good morning, Mr. Montgomery," she purred. But Caleb saw something he hadn't noticed before. When she thought he wasn't looking, when she checked her phone, her expression was all business, cold, focused. She typed something quickly, then deleted it, then retyped it. Her fingers moved with the efficiency of someone conducting a transaction, not a newlywed basking in marital bliss. "I need to see my mother today," Caleb said suddenly. Lucia looked up, and for just a moment, something sharp flashed in her eyes. "On our first day as husband and wife? Can't it wait? It's about my father's estate. Some paperwork she needs me to sign." The lie came easily, surprising him. Lucia studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Of course, darling. Family first. I'll do some shopping while you handle business." She kissed him, and it felt different, somehow mechanical, as if she were going through motions rather than expressing genuine affection. An hour later, Caleb sat in his mother's kitchen, while Judith laid out everything she had discovered. Judith spread photocopies across the kitchen table, like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Bank records, background checks, immigration documents, all compiled in less than 12 hours by her former colleagues who still owed her favors. "There is no Lucia Navarro," Judith said quietly. "Not born in Caracas in 1992, not immigrated to Miami, not anywhere in any official database." Caleb stared at the papers, his world tilting. "That's impossible. She has a passport, a driver's license, a social security number. All fake. Extremely good fakes, but fake nonetheless." Judith pulled out another document. "But this name exists. Isabella Gomez. Venezuelan national. Last known location, Panama City. Before that, Geneva. Before that, Dallas." She laid out 3 photographs, grainy surveillance images. from society pages and wedding announcements. Different hair colors, slightly different features, but unmistakably the same woman. 3 weddings in 6 years. Each groom reported significant financial losses within months. Each time, Isabella Gomez disappeared without a trace. Caleb's hands shook as he picked up the photos. His wife, his Lucia, standing beside other men, wearing other wedding dresses, smiling those same perfect smiles. "She's a con artist," he whispered. Judith nodded. Very skilled one. She targets wealthy men, builds relationships slowly, gains trust, then vanishes with everything she can access. But she hasn't taken anything from me. She even suggested a prenup, which makes her smarter than before. She's playing a longer game this time, Caleb, waiting until you're comfortable, until your guard is completely down. Caleb stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "I need proof, something concrete. I can't just accuse her based on photographs and missing." "For records." Judith hesitated, then pulled out the final piece of evidence, the note from the manor house. Caleb read it 3 times, his face draining of color. "Montgomery Holdings, that's Dad's trust. The one you just gained full access to after getting married. The timing isn't coincidental." Outside, Lupo barked sharply. Caleb looked through the window to see the German shepherd in the yard, staring toward the driveway with that same intense focus he'd had at the wedding. A car was pulling up. Lucia's rental. She stepped out, shopping bags in hand, smiling brightly. "She said she was going shopping," Caleb muttered. "She's checking on you," Judith corrected. "Making sure you're actually here. Making sure I'm not telling you things she doesn't want you to know." Lucia walked toward the house but stopped when she saw Lupo. The dog's posture was rigid, aggressive. She stayed by her car, pulling out her phone instead of approaching. "What do I do?" Caleb asked his mother. Judith's expression was steel. "You act normal. You don't let her know we suspect anything. And tonight, when she's asleep, you search everything she owns." That night, Caleb waited until Lucia's breathing deepened into sleep. His heart hammered as he slipped from bed, moving with careful silence toward the guest room where her things remained from the wedding preparation. The suitcase sat under the bed, expensive leather, combination lock. He knew her birthday, or what she claimed was her birthday. The lock clicked open. Inside, clothes were folded with military precision, makeup arranged by type and color, everything organized, controlled. He searched methodically, fingers trembling. In a zippered side pocket, he found the first passport. Different name, Isabella Gomez. Same face, different hair. His stomach lurched. Behind the suitcase lining, he felt something flat and hard. He peeled back the fabric carefully. A flash drive, taped secure. Caleb carried it to his laptop, hands shaking so badly he could barely insert it. The drive wasn't encrypted. Folder after folder opened before his eyes. Dallas 2019, Geneva 2020, Panama City 2022. Each contained the same type of files: photographs of men, wedding photos, bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, scanned passports under different names, email threads discussing account access and offshore routing. His folder was already there, Charleston 2025. Inside, detailed financial records of the Montgomery family holdings, property, deeds, trust documents, screenshots of his banking passwords, likely captured through keylogger software, and a timeline, meticulously planned, showing when she would execute the final transfer, 3 days from now. Caleb sat frozen, staring at the evidence of his own destruction. She had mapped out everything, studied him like a target, played him perfectly. The woman he loved didn't exist. She never had. From the bedroom he heard movement, Lucia stirring. He quickly closed the laptop, shoved the flash drive in his pocket, and returned the suitcase exactly as he'd found it. When he slipped back into bed, Lucia rolled toward him, her arm draping across his chest. "Where did you go?" she murmured sleepily. "Bathroom," he whispered, his voice surprisingly steady. She kissed his shoulder and settled back into sleep. But Caleb lay awake until dawn, the flash drive burning in his pocket, like evidence of his own foolishness. The next morning, Lucia was radiant. She made coffee, hummed, while cooking eggs, wore Caleb's shirt like they were living in a honeymoon fantasy. Every gesture was perfect, every smile calculated to maintain the illusion. "I was thinking we could finalize those trust transfers today," she said casually, buttering toast. "Get all the paperwork done before the honeymoon?" Caleb's grip tightened on his coffee mug. "Maybe after lunch. I need to organize some documents first." Her smile never faltered, but her eyes sharpened slightly. Of course, darling. No rush. She was pushing now, ready to execute. The timeline on that flash drive had been accurate. Caleb called his mother from the car, voice low and urgent. I found everything. She's moving today. What do I do? I've already contacted the State Department and FBI. They're building a case, but they need you to stall her, Caleb. Don't let her access those accounts. That afternoon, Caleb told Lucia they needed to talk. He led her to his father's study, the room with leather chairs and the wall safe, containing family documents. Lupo sat in the corner, silent but watchful. Lucia entered gracefully, settling into a chair with perfect posture. This sounds serious, she said lightly. Caleb placed the flash drive on the desk between them. I know who you are. The room fell absolutely silent. Lucia didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there, eyes locked on his. He spoke calmly, reciting facts like reading a report. Isabella Gomez, Geneva, Panama, Dallas, 4 cons that I know of. The fake, identity, the offshore accounts, the exit strategy. Still nothing from her. No denial, no tears, no panic. Finally, she leaned back and smiled. A different smile this time, genuine in its coldness. Then I guess we're done pretending, she said softly. You were going to clean me out, Caleb stated. I was, she confirmed. And what stopped you? Lucia's eyes shifted to Lupo in the corner. Honestly, that damn dog. He wouldn't stop watching me, wouldn't let me move freely. I've never had that problem before. Caleb's jaw tightened. Why? Why do this? She shrugged elegantly. Because men like you believe in fairy tales. The mysterious woman with no past, no baggage. You don't question it. You just fall. I loved you. I know, she said, and something flickered across her face. That was the part I didn't plan for. Lucia stood slowly, walking to the window as if contemplating escape routes. So what now? You call the police, I go to prison, you play the victim? I already made the call, Caleb said quietly. They're on their way. Her composure cracked just slightly. Her face paled and she turned to look at him with something that might have been genuine emotion. You actually did it. You gave me no choice. Outside, the crunch of tires on gravel. A black SUV pulled into the driveway, followed by a second vehicle. Federal agents, not local police. This was bigger than a simple fraud case. Lucia watched through the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. I could have given it all back, she said softly. Every cent. I hadn't touched your accounts yet. It's not about the money anymore. 2 agents entered the house, credentials already displayed. They were professional, efficient, almost gentle as they explained the charges. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit financial crimes across state lines. Lucia didn't resist. She simply nodded, extended her wrists for the handcuffs. But as they led her toward the door, she stopped and turned back to Caleb. I meant what I said in that letter, she told him. The one I left in the suitcase. I never planned to fall for you. That was my biggest mistake. What letter? Caleb asked, confused. She smiled sadly. You'll find it, and when you do, you'll understand that not everything was a lie. The agents guided her out. Lupo stood at the window beside Caleb, watching the SUV pull away. The dog pressed his head against Caleb's hand, offering comfort the only way he knew how. You tried to tell me, Caleb whispered, his voice rough. From the very beginning, you knew. That evening, Caleb found the letter exactly where she said it would be, hidden in the suitcase, folded carefully, handwritten in elegant script. Caleb, if you're reading this, I already know how it ended. I never planned to fall for you, but I did. That was my biggest mistake. Not the con, not the plan. Falling in love was what broke everything. I'm sorry I couldn't be the person you thought I was. Maybe I wish I had. Beanel. Caleb read it twice, then let it fall from his hands. Lupo sat beside him, steady and loyal, the only constant in a world that had just shattered. 2 days after Lucia's arrest, Caleb couldn't let it go. Something about that letter gnawed at him, the genuine pain beneath her words. He began his own investigation, not to forgive her, but to understand. In Lucia's jewelry box, he found a locket he'd never seen before. Gold, worn, with initials engraved, LG. Inside were 2 tiny photographs. A man in military uniform and a young girl, maybe 6 years old. The clasp had a name etched in the corner, Liana Gomez. Caleb searched the name online. What he found changed everything. Liana Gomez, missing person, reported 12 years ago in Houston. Age 17, disappeared from foster care. The case had been closed due to inactivity, but the photograph matched. The facial structure, the eyes. Lucia was Liana. He dug deeper, finding fragments of a broken life, termination of parental rights documents, psychiatric facility records from her childhood, a photo of young Liana standing beside a woman wearing a name tag, Officer M. Navarro. The pieces assembled into a tragedy, not a criminal mastermind, but a lost girl who had been failed by every system designed to protect her, someone who had learned to survive by becoming whoever she needed to be. The cons weren't born from greed. They were built from desperation, from a teenager abandoned by the world, learning. That identity was currency and trust was a weapon. Caleb sat surrounded by evidence of pain, not malice, and for the first time since the wedding, he wondered if the woman he'd married had been running not toward wealth, but away from a past too painful to carry under her real name. Caleb drove to the detention center the next morning. When Lucia appeared behind the glass, she looked different, tired, stripped of makeup and pretense, but somehow more real than she'd ever been. "I didn't expect." "Sayu," she said, picking up the phone. "I found the locket," Caleb replied, "and the name Liana." Her composure shattered. She looked down, swallowing hard against emotion she'd hidden for years. "So now you know. Tell me," he said gently. "Tell me the truth." She spoke quietly, words tumbling out like confessions long held. "I was 16 when they put me in state care. My mother, Officer Navarro, she tried to adopt me, but the system said a single cop couldn't raise a child properly. They took me away from the only person who ever loved me. When she died, no one even told me, just handed me a trash bag of clothes and a new placement. Everything after that was survival. Becoming someone else meant I could matter, could exist without the pain of being Liana, the girl nobody wanted." Caleb listened, seeing her fully for the first time. Not the con artist, not the perfect bride, but the scared teenager who had learned to disappear into new identities because her real self had been rejected too many times. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because I forgot how to be real," she whispered. "I'd been pretending so long, I didn't know how to stop." They sat in silence, separated by glass, but connected by truth finally spoken. "The dog knew," she said with a sad smile. "Somehow Lupo saw through everything." Caleb nodded. "He always does." 6 months later, Caleb stood in a courtroom as Liana's testimony helped dismantle an entire network of identity fraud that had operated for over a decade. Her cooperation earned her a reduced sentence, time served, supervised release, and immunity for future testimony. When she walked out of that courtroom, Caleb was waiting, not as a husband, but as someone who understood that people are more complicated than their worst decisions. Lupo sat beside him, and when Liana knelt down, the German shepherd didn't growl. He simply let her bury her face in his fur, accepting her tears without judgment. They didn't reconcile. Romantically, that story had ended, but Caleb helped her find the woman from the photograph, Officer Margaret Navarro, now retired and living in Georgia. The reunion was quiet, profound, two people stolen from each other by bureaucracy, finally finding their way back. Liana started volunteering at a youth shelter, helping kids like she had been. Caleb returned to his life, wiser and more cautious, and Lupo continued doing what he'd always done, watching, protecting, knowing truths that humans often miss. On quiet evenings, Caleb sometimes wondered about the nature of deception and redemption, about whether love built on lies could contain kernels of truth, about whether the instincts of a loyal dog matter more than the pretty words of a practiced deceiver. He never found definitive answers, but he learned to trust the warnings that come without words, the gut feelings that speak louder than explanations, the loyalty of a creature who sees with more than just eyes, because sometimes the most important truth isn't what someone tells you, it's what they make a dog feel. And you, what did you think about this story? Tell us in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next videos.